Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tonight we examine rising US-Canada tensions, reports of covert US contacts with Alberta separatists, and what this means for trade, sovereignty and Europe's interests, with Michael K. Dembek, head of Polish Trade Office in Canada. Mr. Dembek, welcome to TVP World. Thanks for taking time.
It's good to be back.
Great. So, what's all this about? Talking to separatists from Alberta. I mean, has there been a movement by residents of that province to secede from the rest of Canada?
There is a movement in place. It's called the Alberta Prosperity Project. The goal of the organization is to enact a referendum in the province of Alberta and potentially leave Canada if that were successful. Now, cycling back to the beginning of your question, apparently, as reported by the Financial Times, there have been meetings between the separatist groups and U.S. officials. Now, what was said is unknown. But what we could compare it to is back in 1995, Canada had another referendum in the province of Quebec, and Quebec was looking to leave Canada. And elected government officials then spoke with the French government. And during that conversation, they were trying to get France to commit to recognizing their sovereignty if they ended up leaving Canada, and to lobby European countries to do the same. However, in this case, we just have regular citizens of the province of Alberta, and we do not have any elected government officials in these chats if they did indeed happen.
So legally speaking, even if Alberta were to secede, even if there was some kind of vote, there'd be no governance of the province, would there?
No, not entirely. Well, they have a hurdle to get through. They first have to get 177,000 signatures to even enact a referendum. And there has been a counter initiative to that called the Alberta Forever Canada project, which they've already gained over 400,000, so double. And I don't think this project has reached that threshold yet. Now, even if they did, an unlikely scenario, vote to leave Canada, they would still have to face negotiation with Canada. But on top of that, we have to remind the viewers that Alberta is made up of 45 First Nations, and their treaties are with the Canadian government, not with the province of Alberta. So you're going to open up a whole legal fight to be able to even get this through. So it's not going to be an easy task, and especially since we're looking at the polls, it's about 20 to 30% of Albertans support seceding from Canada.
Right, so I'm conscious of the fact that we don't know what was said in these secret meetings, but bearing in mind what President Trump has been saying recently about making Canada the 51st state, what do you think is possible, to have taken place?
Well, in today's world, anything's possible, but just on the facts that we have right now, I don't think President Trump has said anything publicly about Alberta's referendum and potentially leaving, so that we don't know exactly where that leads to. But let's remind ourselves of the last federal election in Canada. When Trump started the whole 51 state talks, the Conservative Party was projected to win, but once he started speaking, he did more harm than good for the Conservative movement. And if we look at this movement in Alberta, it's more of a Conservative movement. So it's probably best for Donald Trump not to speak about this, because it'll probably lose support.
Understood. Now, zooming out a little bit, give us your overview on the relationship as it stands, with all the ups and downs that have happened recently, Davos and before. How does it stand at this moment?
Well, everything comes down to trade. Obviously, we know that there are tensions between Canada and the U.S., and we do know that the USMCA agreement is going to have to be renegotiated by July 1st of this year. So I think these public comments that are made, I think it's just slowly building up to those negotiations. And I think all this boils down to the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S.
Right, I want to talk about the USMC, but before we get there, I also want to talk about Mark Carney, talking about a complete breakdown, a rupture of the trade global order, and getting closer to China. And Trump's response was, well, I'm going to slap 100% tariffs on you if you do that. Carney seems to have backed down a little bit on that move, hasn't he?
From my understanding, publicly, yes. But to my understanding of the USMCA agreement, Canada would have to announce a new trade deal, and I think this was just the bare minimum between China. So I don't think it's going to get to those 100% tariffs, as Trump mentioned.
So is it the threat of the tariffs that made Mark Carney back down? Because he was talking about diversifying away, right? Trade from the US and so on. He spoke about all of that, and it would seem to be a logical next step to build closer ties with China. But then we haven't really had a trade deal, or those two countries haven't had a trade deal. Is it because of the threat of the tariffs, do you think?
It's a possibility in this case. I mean, for Canada's sake, China is the second largest trading partner of Canada. So I think Canada would like to have good trade relationships with any country, especially with the United States. But at this moment, with all these tensions, I think it's very hard to negotiate any deal with any country if your main trading partner is publicly unhappy with it.
Right. Now, let's go on to the USMCA. Now, one of the clauses in that agreement is that if any country deals with or has a trade deal with another country which doesn't have an economic democracy, if I can put it like that, then they need to leave the agreement. And surely that might have had an influence on whether Mark Carney, decided to go ahead with China or not. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's something that Canada must be taken in consideration. But again, we don't know what's going to happen in these negotiations this year. Potentially, maybe they will move out of the deal completely. Then Canada will be free to do what it wants.
Okay, so the other aspect of it, of course, is that the US has entered into a soybean agreement with China. So surely one can't criticize Canada for entering a similar deal, can one?
Well, I mean, we should. They shouldn't. But in today's political landscape, anything's possible, and it's definitely a challenging time to be a politician.
So one rule for one, not for the other. Now let's move on to the relationship between Canada and Europe. Again, at Davos, one got a very distinct impression that Canada was looking to strengthen ties with Europe. How would you assess those ties as they stand, and are there any moves in play to strengthen them?
Well, there's an existing agreement between the European Union and Canada, the CETA agreement, which essentially covers 98% of products tariff-free as long as it's produced in the European Union or Canada. And that's been a strong agreement for Canada and for the European Union. So it's always been in a good relationship since that deal has been enacted. I'm not entirely sure where Canada can really improve on. I know there was a mineral deal signed a couple months back with Germany. And I think now the move for Canada and the European Union is on the defense sector. I think there's a lot of potential. Canada has increased its budget in defense, and there's many European countries that produce fantastic defense equipment and products and services that Canada can acquire, and likewise for Europe.
Right. Well, you mentioned the defence sector, which again comes back to a contract between Canada and the United States for 88 F-35 fighter jets, which Canada is kind of humming and hawing about and considering the Swedish Gripen, for example, as an alternative. What's happening there? Is that contract going to be enforced, do you think, or will Canada switch?
I think it's probably going to be used as some type of leverage during these discussions about the USMCA agreement, in my personal opinion.
Right, and does that mean they'll stay with that agreement, do you think?
I think if Canada and the U.S. want to enter a fair trade agreement between the countries and go back to business as usual that was happening about a year ago, they should. But anything's possible in today's landscape.
Right. Well, with the F-35s, they were intended to form part of the NORAD shield in the Arctic region. So if Canada doesn't buy it, then you'll have more American F-35s flying over Canadian airspace and in the Arctic as a result. Now, you mentioned closer defence links with Europe. What areas do you think Canada might be looking at?
I have a lot of areas in terms of procurement. I know the Army is looking for new rifles. So, for example, potentially maybe the Polish rifle company Grot can provide weapons to the Canadian Army, and in different types of procurement for the Navy and the like. So, there's a lot of opportunities right now in that sector, especially in Canada. The CanSec is coming up in May, and we know that there's going to be a lot of European delegations going to that. So I think you'll see Canada and Europe working more closely together. And from my private discussions with Canadians, the general consensus is that they're going to be avoiding U.S. products in exchange for European products.
Right. Well, I mean, Poland has been the recipient of EU funding for defence purposes, and is investing very heavily on manufacturing of military equipment. Are you aware of any conversations, or can you share any conversations that might be happening between the Polish defence industry and the Canadian procurement of defence mechanism?
I can't speak to any conversations that are happening, but I'm sure they're in contact.
Okay. Now, in terms of other countries within outside the EU, so I'm thinking more the Indo-Pacific region, for example. How would you characterise the relationship between Canada and those countries in terms of both trade and military procurement?
Well, I'm not entirely sure when it comes to military procurement in that region, but for trade, Canada has been pushing every single trade deal it has, and they're trying to help out Canadian exporters to get products out and to vitalize the economy in Canada right now amid the tensions with Trump. So Canada is pushing any relationship it can get with any country to build positive outcomes for bilateral relations in trade.
Understood. Ms. Dembek, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. World News coming right up. Goodbye.